My mother's gone, and you're already signing the papers. That was the first thing that left my mouth when I walked into the lawyer's office that morning, my mother's funeral flowers still fresh in my hands, the black dress barely zipped since dawn. There he was, my younger brother Dennis, sitting behind our family lawyer's desk like he owned the place. One hand resting on the armchair, the other flipping through a pile of documents. He didn't even look up when I spoke. "It's called responsibility, Elaine," he said, with that smug little smirk he used to wear when he'd cheat at Monopoly. "Someone has to handle things before they get messy." I stared at the papers. "Before they get messy, Mom hasn't even been buried a week and you're already dividing her estate." He finally looked up then, calm, polished, and poisonous. "It's what she wanted. I have the new will right here. You can sign your acknowledgement or have your lawyer review it, but either way, it's done." The lawyer, a man I barely recognized, slid a folder toward me, Last Will and Testament of Margaret Foster. The signature looked like hers, the handwriting did not. "Dennis," I whispered, "Mom never mentioned a new will." He shrugged. "Maybe she didn't trust you to handle it. You know how emotional you can be." That one cut deeper than any knife could. Emotional. The word he'd used all our lives to shut me up when I defended Mom, when I refused to lie for him, when I tried to keep peace. Her house, her stocks, even the trust. I flipped through the pages, my pulse thudding in my ears. "She left it all to you." He leaned back, lacing his fingers like a CEO who just closed a deal. "Technically, I'm managing it on behalf of the family. You'll still benefit indirectly." Indirectly. Like a child begging for scraps. Something inside me cracked that moment, not loud, not visible, just a slow, quiet snap that travels straight through the heart. I turned to the lawyer. "May I have a copy of the original?" He cleared his throat. "There is no original, ma'am. This is the original." The room went silent. Even the ceiling fan seemed to hold its breath. Dennis signed the final page with a flourish and stood, straightening his tie. "Mom trusted me to take care of things. You should be grateful." Grateful. That word echoed all the way to the parking lot, all the way home, all the way into the sleepless nights that followed. Grateful that he'd taken everything. Grateful that my mother's love had been rewritten in ink I didn't recognize. I didn't cry that day. I didn't scream. I didn't even call a lawyer. I just sat at my kitchen table, staring at that photocopy and thought, if Dennis wants control so badly, I'll let him have it. Let him choke on it. Because that was the moment I decided. I might have lost my mother, but I wasn't about to lose her legacy too. The burial was supposed to bring closure. Instead, it felt like a second funeral this time for my dignity. People whispered in corners, voices dipping whenever I walked by. "Poor Elaine, I heard Dennis is handling everything." "Yeah, he was always the smart one." Each word felt like sandpaper scraping my grief raw. Dennis played the perfect role, black suit, soft smile, a hand on every shoulder. The grieving son, the strong sibling. I hadn't known him since birth. I might have believed it too. When Pastor Grant began the final prayer, Dennis slipped away to take a call. I followed him instinctively, maybe hoping he was human for a minute. Instead, I found him outside the church, laughing with a realtor. "Yes, the house is prime property," he said. "We'll clear it out next week." My chest tightened. "You're selling Mom's house already." He turned, annoyed. "Elaine, please don't start. I have responsibilities now." Responsibilities. I snapped. "She's not even in the ground, Dennis." His eyes hardened. "You always make everything about emotion. This is about logic, about business." I looked at him, really looked, and realized something chilling. He wasn't mourning. He was managing assets. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in my car outside the old house. Through the window, I could still see Mom's curtains glowing softly in the lamplight. And I whispered to the dark, "You were right, Mom. Grief doesn't change people. It just unmasks them." A week later, I went back to the house. The front door creaked open, and I almost turned around. It didn't smell like home anymore. It smelled like paint thinner and stranger's cologne. Dennis had hired a cleaning crew. They were boxing up Mom's things, tossing decades of memories into black garbage bags. Her favorite armchair, the one she'd spent evenings reading in, was already at the curb. "Stop!" I shouted. "You can't just throw those out." The man looked up, confused. "Mr. Foster said it's all cleared." Mr. Foster, my brother, the new owner of our mother's soul. I found Dennis in the kitchen sipping coffee as if he hadn't just bulldozed through her memory. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. He sighed dramatically. "Because I'm practical, Elaine, not sentimental. Someone has to keep this family from drowning in nostalgia." "She wasn't a burden," I said. "She was our mother." He didn't flinch. "And now she's gone, move on." That broke something in me I didn't know could still break. I took one last look at the walls where our family photos once hung and walked out before he could see the tears. But I didn't leave empty-handed. I grabbed the one thing he hadn't touched yet, Mom's old recipe box. Something about it felt sacred. I didn't know it yet, but that little box would end up saving everything. Grief has a way of making you clean things that don't need cleaning. I sat at my kitchen table a week later, sorting through Mom's old recipe cards just to keep my hands busy. Cinnamon rolls, chicken pot pie, lemon cake, the handwriting pulled at my heart. Then one card slipped loose from the stack. The handwriting on the back wasn't a recipe, it was a letter. My breath caught. It was dated just 2 months before her death. If anything happens to me, the trust is to remain in both Elaine's and Dennis's names. Neither may act without the other's consent. My heart pounded. There it was, Mom's voice, her words, her intent. And below it, her signature, steady and familiar. But this wasn't the same signature on the will Dennis had shown me. That one had been shaky, almost printed. This one looked alive. I sat there trembling, staring at the letter, every neuron firing the same word, fake. If the will was fake, that meant everything Dennis had done, every sale, every signature, every loan was built on a lie. For the first time since she died, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not grief, not fear, purpose. I didn't tell anyone, not yet. You don't scream when you're holding dynamite, you stay still and learn where to set it. For days, I studied the letter like a detective. The pen strokes, the date. Even the indentation where she'd pressed too hard. This was no casual note. She'd written it knowing there might be a fight someday. That realization hit me like sunlight through clouds. She knew Dennis. She'd seen this coming. I made a copy and locked the original away. Then I started digging. I called the local courthouse and requested public probate records. I reached out to her old financial advisor, pretending to ask routine questions. The man hesitated, then said something that stopped me cold. "Ma'am, your mother's last correspondence mentioned a co-trustee structure. She said both her children would manage the account together." He paused. "But after her passing, your brother came alone with a new document. It removed your name." I thanked him calmly, hung up and sat in silence. He'd done it. Dennis had rewritten our mother's final wishes for his own gain. I didn't cry, I didn't call him. I just whispered to myself, "You wanted everything, Dennis. Let's see what you do when it all starts slipping away." And that was the night Elaine Foster began planning her quiet revenge, not with rage, but with precision. Because sometimes the sweetest justice doesn't come from fire. It comes from patience. It started with a phone call I nearly ignored. I was halfway through filling out an unemployment claim when the name Harper & Dunn Accounting popped up on my screen, my old firm. For a moment I froze, my pulse quickened, part fear, part nostalgia. I thought it might be Dennis calling to twist the knife, but it wasn't. "Elaine, it's Marcy from HR," came a warm voice. "We all heard what happened. I just wanted to say everyone here knows it wasn't your fault. You were one of the best." For the first time in weeks, someone used my name without pity or suspicion. "Thank you," I whispered, trying to sound composed. When the call ended, I sat staring at the wall for a long time. The world hadn't completely turned its back on me. Dennis might have stained my name, but he hadn't erased it. That night, I reopened my laptop, updated my resume, and whispered, "You're not finished, Elaine, not yet." 3 weeks later, I landed a temporary consulting job with a small auditing firm in downtown Seattle. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me purpose. Ironically, my first assignment was tied to Westbrook Development Group, one of Dennis's partner companies based out of Los Angeles. As I dug through their quarterly reports, I noticed something familiar. Fund transfers routed through a shell company Dennis once bragged about setting up in Nevada. I didn't jump to conclusions. Instead, I logged every detail, backed up all files, and archived my findings in a hidden drive. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about understanding how deep his corruption ran. The more I investigated, the more I realized Dennis wasn't just greedy. He was strategic. And strategic men only fall when they overestimate their own intelligence. I hadn't planned on seeing him again. But life, in all its twisted humor, loves an ambush. It happened at a charity gala in San Francisco, one my late mother used to sponsor every year. Mrs. Benson, Mom's oldest friend, had begged me to attend. "Just come, honey, for closure." I walked in quietly, black dress, simple heels. And there he was, Dennis Foster, shaking hands, flashing that polished smile, every inch the successful businessman. Our eyes met across the room. His expression flickered only for a second before he put on his perfect grin. Elaine, he said, walking over. I didn't know you'd be here. I smiled lightly. Neither did I, he offered me champagne. Let's not keep grudges, okay? Family's all we've got left. I tapped my glass against his and replied calmly, Oh, don't worry, I'm not keeping grudges. I leaned slightly closer. I'm keeping records. His smile stiffened, just a hint, but I caught it. That night, as I watched him charm the crowd, I noticed something telling. The more he laughed, the tighter he held his drink. Confidence and fear perfectly blended. Weeks passed. Then, quietly, small things started surfacing. Anonymous emails, former employees, old clients. People Dennis had cheated or discarded like trash. Each message was a piece of a puzzle, forged contracts, suspicious loans, missing trust funds. I didn't reply to any of them. I just archived and labeled every file, every screenshot, every name. The picture forming wasn't pretty, it was criminal. Sometimes I'd sit in bed, reading those files under a dim lamp, and hear my mother's voice in my head. Be patient, sweetheart. Don't fight fire with fire, fight it with truth. So I waited, quietly. And for the first time since she died, I didn't feel broken. I felt armed. The offer came out of nowhere, a job at Rayner & Co., one of the top auditing firms in Washington state. They needed a financial investigator, discreet, detail-oriented, emotionally composed. In other words, me. I accepted without hesitation. It felt like the universe was moving pieces on my behalf. 2 weeks into the job, I was reviewing new client portfolios when I saw a name that froze me cold. Foster Enterprises, LLC, registered under Dennis Foster, my brother's company. And just like that, fate placed me back in his orbit. This time, not as his sister, not as his victim, but as the woman quietly standing behind the firewall, watching him build his empire on borrowed lies, and waiting for the right moment when the truth would be louder than any revenge. The files came in like an avalanche, quarterly audits, vendor payments, offshore transactions. I'd seen thousands of financial reports in my career, but Dennis's had a certain arrogance to them. Too clean. Too smooth. When numbers look perfect, something's usually rotten underneath. Late one night, while combing through a spreadsheet, I noticed it, a pattern of payments to a consultant named R. Lewis, supposedly for property research. The same amount, same date every month. Out of curiosity, I cross-referenced the tax ID. The ID was real. The person wasn't. Dennis had created a ghost employee. I leaned back, heart pounding. This wasn't mismanagement. It was deliberate, calculated fraud. I printed the documents, slipped them into a manila folder, and locked them in my drawer. Then I whispered to myself, You're digging in the right place, Elaine. Keep going. The next week, an unexpected visitor showed up at my office, Tom Warner, an old family friend who used to handle Mom's estate paperwork. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd been sitting on a secret too long. Elaine, I shouldn't be here, he began, but I can't shake the feeling that your brother altered your mother's documents after she passed. My chest tightened. You think the will was forged? He nodded slowly. The original version I drafted named both of you co-trustees, but after her death, Dennis submitted a new version to the county court, one I didn't write. My fingers went numb. Do you still have a copy of the original? He hesitated, then opened his briefcase. I thought you might ask. Inside was a faded envelope, the original trust documents with my mother's signature intact. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Tom lowered his voice. Be careful. Men like Dennis don't stop until they're stopped. I gave him a faint smile. Then he's about to meet someone who doesn't run anymore. When Dennis called, I almost laughed. Hey, sis, he said cheerfully. I heard through the grapevine you're working for Rayner now. Good for you. His tone was light, too light. He wasn't congratulating me, he was probing. I am, I said casually. They've been great to me. That's nice. Listen, maybe we should grab lunch, clear the air. I agreed, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see how nervous he really was. We met at a high-end steakhouse in downtown Los Angeles. He ordered wine, smiling that same politician's smile. I've been thinking, he said, maybe we could work together again, families stronger united. I stared at him, letting the silence stretch. You only reach out when you're afraid, Dennis. His grin faltered. Afraid of what? Of the truth. He set his glass down a little too hard. You've always had a flair for drama. I smiled softly. And you've always underestimated the quiet ones. The waiter appeared with our check. I signed it without looking away from him and said, You should enjoy your steak, Dennis. They say appetite's the first thing to go when your world starts falling apart. By winter, I had quietly built something stronger than evidence, connections. An accountant from Nevada, a former partner from San Diego, and a secretary Dennis once fired for attitude. All of them had stories. All of them had receipts. We formed a quiet, invisible chain, sending files, records, and statements through encrypted channels. Every night, I'd log in, collect another piece of the puzzle, and feel that old fire reigniting. Each document, each statement was another step toward justice. But revenge isn't just about exposing someone. It's about reclaiming what they stole, your dignity, your peace, your truth. And every time I found another lie Dennis told, I whispered to myself, "You taught me how to play dirty, Dennis. You just never taught me how to play smarter." It happened by accident, the email that changed everything. I was reviewing Rayner's pending accounts when a flagged message appeared. It was from Dennis's assistant, mistakenly copied to my work address. Subject line, "Urgent, need to move funds before Q2 audit." My stomach dropped. Attached were transfer orders, millions being rerouted from the family trust into offshore investments under a false company name. And here's the twist. The signature on the transfer authorization wasn't Dennis's. It was mine. He had forged my name this time. The anger that washed through me was cold and precise. He hadn't just betrayed me, he'd tried to make me a scapegoat. I printed the email, every page crisp as ice. Then I looked out my office window at the gray Seattle skyline and whispered, "You just handed me the weapon I needed, Dennis." Because now, this wasn't about payback. It was about proof. And I intended to make sure he destroyed himself with his own hands. There are moments when you realize you can't be the whole army. Tom introduced me to Maya Rivera, a probate attorney who'd handled ugly family fights for 20 years, and Evan Cho, a forensic accountant who smelled fraud the way dogs smell fear. We met in a cramped conference room at Maya's firm, legal pads, half-empty coffee cups, and a whiteboard that would soon carry our plan. Maya didn't coo or pity. She read the lemon cake note, the probate copy, the email with forged transfers, and nodded like someone reading obvious facts. "We'll petition probate to set aside that will and seek an injunction to freeze the trust assets," she said, blunt and efficient. "We'll also ask the court for forensic examination of Dennis's transactions." Evan tapped his tablet. "I'll trace the R. Lewis payments and the offshore routes. If those transfers went through U.S. banks, we can get subpoenas issued. This isn't guesswork, it's paper warfare." For the first time in months, the fear loosened. I felt steadier, not because revenge was imminent, but because I'd stopped being alone. Maya slid a form across the table, an emergency petition. "Sign here. We move tomorrow." I put my pen down, heart steady. I signed. Night fell as I walked home. Somewhere between the courthouse and my apartment, my phone buzzed, an unknown number texting a single line, "Be careful who you trust." Court smells like disinfectant and old paper. It also smells like chances. Maya filed the petition before dawn. By noon, we had a temporary hearing. Dennis's lawyer showed up smelling of cologne and confidence. He argued technicalities, lateness, formality, emotional distress. He painted me as a bruised sister, trying to undo a miserable child's final comfort. Maya listened, then stood. "Your Honor, the handwriting discrepancies, the notarization gaps, the sudden transfers into shell companies, those are not emotional responses. They are red flags. We're asking for an immediate freeze on the trust pending a full audit." The judge peered down at the exhibits Evan had organized, spreadsheets, bank screenshots, the lemon cake letter, and asked a single, cold question. Is there a credible showing of probable fraud? Evan stepped up like a man who enjoyed order. He spoke in numbers and routes and flagged accounts. His calm made the courtroom lean forward. The judge didn't grant a permanent ruling. That would take time. But she did sign an order for a temporary hold on transfers from the trust and set a formal hearing 2 weeks out. Dennis left the courtroom white-faced, muttering about busybodies. His lawyer shot me a look, thin, warning, like a man smelling a trap. As I walked out, a courthouse clerk handed me an envelope I hadn't expected. A certified letter addressed to Dennis, from a federal investigator asking for voluntary cooperation. If there's one thing the guilty understand, it's noise. They create it to confuse the watchers. Within 48 hours, Dennis had launched a PR offensive, a glossy press release calling him a trusted steward of family assets, a paid op-ed in a local paper about family disputes and mental health. Anonymous social posts smeared me as bitter and unhinged. It stung, but it wasn't new. The real trouble came when Foster Enterprises' biggest investor, one I'd watched on Evan's list, told his board he'd suspend funding until clarity returned. The markets don't like uncertainty, they dislike legal holds even more. Dennis called me that night. His voice was shorter, tighter. "Elaine, you don't want this. You'll ruin Mom's legacy." "I'm trying to save it," I said simply. "From you," he laughed, a sharp sound. "You think paperwork will topple me? People trust me." I hung up and opened Evan's latest packet. He'd traced a string of payments to a Nevada LLC, then to an account linked to construction bids in Lowe's Angels. He'd also flagged discrepancies in employee timesheets. The Phantom R. Lewis had invoices that matched invoices for work that was never done. That was the smoke, and now agencies were circling the flame. At 2 a.m, a knock on my door woke me. No one was there. Just a single business card on the welcome mat, Foster Enterprises, CFO, with a phone number circled in ink. The CFO called the next morning. He sounded like a man deciding whether to jump. "Elaine, this is Greg Malone. I don't know how to say this without putting myself at risk." We met in a diner 2 miles from Dennis's office, cracked vinyl booths and the smell of burnt coffee. Greg pushed a manila envelope toward me. Inside were printouts, ledgers, an internal memo ordering expedited transfers, and an email chain showing Dennis authorizing off-book loans. "He wanted plausible deniability," Greg said, voice low. "But he left crumbs." He admitted fear, career ruin, threats, loyalty to survival. But he also had regrets. "I can't keep signing things I know aren't right." I told him what Maya and Evan had already started. Subpoenas, a federal inquiry, the probate challenge. "If you want to help honestly. Turn these over to Maya. We'll make sure you get protection and credit for cooperating." Greg hesitated, then slid me a thumb drive. "There's more on this, but it's encrypted and stored on a company server. I can't access it without trace." As I pocketed the drive, my phone buzzed. Another message, a photo of Mom's old kitchen table, the one in the house, and a single caption, "We're watching you." Greg's cooperation changed everything. Maya used his documents to amend our petition. Evan used the server logs Greg provided to request preservation orders. The federal investigator, whose name I'd learned was Agent Harris, issued a civil subpoena. The trajectory suddenly felt less fragile and more inevitable. Dennis tried to fight fire with theatrics. He held an emergency shareholders meeting, insisting the temporary hold was panicked and wrong. He called me during the meeting, voice raw. "They can't freeze everything, Elaine. People will lose faith." "They already are," I said. "You made that happen." That afternoon, a process server delivered a sealed order to Foster Enterprises. The judge had approved a special master, an independent auditor appointed to inventory the trust's assets and report on any irregularities. The order required Dennis to surrender certain financial records within 48 hours. He stood in his office, reading the paper, then slammed his hand down on the desk so hard the framed photos rattled. His assistant looked at him like someone watching a man fall. Later that night, as I prepared for sleep, Tom called, voice barely steady. "Elaine, you need to see this." He emailed me a scan page, a line item in Dennis's ledger I hadn't noticed before, payment. Contingency personal, large sum to unknown account date, 2 days before Mom's death. My stomach dropped. Someone had been moving money before she even died. And that meant the plan had been in motion long before the funeral. The morning sun glared across the courthouse steps, bright and merciless. By the time I reached the hearing room, Dennis was already there, suit perfect, smile forced. But there was something else in his eyes now. Fear, barely disguised as arrogance. The special master had filed his preliminary findings overnight, and everyone knew what that meant. Exposure. Evan had been right all along. The offshore accounts, the Nevada shell, the phantom contractor, all led to Dennis's personal trust fund. When the judge asked if Dennis had anything to say, he leaned on his lawyer's arm and muttered, "Clerical oversight. Every company has them." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Maya rose calmly. "Oversight, Your Honor, does not explain a $300,000 transfer marked personal contingency 2 days before Mrs. Foster's death. Nor does it explain identical handwriting on both the will's signature and a check deposit slip." The judge looked over her glasses. "Mr. Foster, if these findings hold, this will could be declared void due to undue influence and fraud." Dennis's smirk vanished. His tie suddenly looked too tight. When the hearing adjourned, I walked past him in the hall. He leaned close enough for me to smell his cologne, expensive, synthetic. "You don't know what you've started," he hissed. I smiled. "Neither do you." The court nullified the fraudulent will. The assets were restored to proper distribution. Dennis's accounts were frozen pending restitution. As the gavel struck, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. Outside, a journalist approached me. "Ms. Foster, do you have any comment for your brother?" I looked straight into the camera. "Tell him Mom finally got her piece."